Chapter 2, Audience Analysis and Listening. The learning objectives for today involve audience-centered audience analysis and demographics, attitudes, beliefs, values, and needs, contextual factors that can be considered when preparing a speech, listening, and how to improve listening. So, Chapter 2 overview the importance of audience analysis, demographic, psychographic characteristics, contextual factors, and listening. Public speaking involves content, and content is the information that you are sharing to your audience in your presentations. And it also involves relationship. What knowledge do you have of your audience? What do you know of their interest? What do you know of their likes and their dislikes? What do you know about the topics that they're passionate about or even apathetic about? So, what kind of relationship do you have of your audience? And this includes some information that you can gather through demographic, psychographic, and contextual characteristics. So, audience analysis is examining and looking at your audience first by its demographic characteristics and then by their internal psychological traits. So, let's talk about demographics. I think most of us have an idea of what demographics are. They're the outward characteristics of your audience. Demo comes from the Greek root word demos, meaning people. Graphic means description. So, three principles of demographics to consider. Avoid stereotyping or totalizing. So, avoid considering, okay, if this person is of this demographic, this is how they feel in all of these situations. I think we know that that's not necessarily always the case. Not all demographics are important in every situation. So, consider what demographics are important considering the situation in which you're speaking in. Demographics will tell you what to cover and what to avoid, and so they will help you to best relate to your audience. So, what is included when looking at demographics? Age, gender, race, ethnicity, and culture, religion, group affiliation, region, occupation, education, socioeconomic level, sexual orientation, and family status all are included under basic demographics. So think about it. Does this leave you wondering if you can even begin to analyze your audience? And I'll say that it is a challenge to have a clear idea of all of the demographic data regarding your audience. But the one thing to keep in mind is, what does your audience have in common, and focus on that. For instance, when you're giving a presentation in a college classroom, you know that all of the audience members are college students. So that gives you an idea of what's going on. If you're giving a presentation to coworkers, then you know all of these people work for this same company. They have these same beliefs. They have knowledge in this same general area. So think about the reason you're giving your presentation, the reason you're giving this speech. What do all of these people have in common? What is bringing all of these people together? Your classmates may be diverse. They may be different ages, ethnicities, or religions, but again, they have the common principle that they are all students. So consider what the commonalities are that are obvious and kind of work from that information. So, psychographic characteristic statements we hold to be true. We know that there are beliefs, what we hold to be true. It's hard but not impossible to change someone's beliefs. And typically, our beliefs come from experience and authority. Attitudes. Attitudes are stable, whether they're positive or negative, response to a person, idea, object, or policy. They're not the same as mood or emotion. Most directly linked to behavior, and they come from many different places. So we develop our attitudes about something kind of based on a variety of reasons. Our values are the goals as we strive for and what we consider important and desirable. So they're not the same as our wants or physical objects, but they are things that we consider to be important. And our needs are important deficiencies we are motivated to fill. And so we'll talk here about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Abraham Maslow basically said that all humans have a hierarchy of needs. In order to work on the need above, you have to have the most basic needs met. So, for instance, physiological needs are our most basic needs that we have. And so that's food, water, usually shelter. These are our most basic physiological needs. So if we are deprived of our most basic physiological needs, then the needs above those, the next level of needs, aren't quite as important. So if we're deprived of food and water, then our safety needs are kind of the next priority. So our safety needs are needs to be safe and secure, to have a shelter that provides safety for us, to not be put in danger, and that would be the next step of needs. Above that, we have love and belonging. So consider this: if your most basic physiological needs are not met, if you do not have food and water, if you do not feel safe, then the love and belonging is not a priority for you. So our most basic physiological needs must be met before the needs on the next tier are important to us. But we need love, we need belonging, but we need food, water, shelter, safety before we need that. And then next is esteem needs. So once we have food, water, shelter, safety, and we have people in our lives that love us, we have relationships. Through those things, then our esteem becomes important. How we feel about ourselves, how we treat ourselves, our inner dialogue, our self-talk, that we feel like we have worth. That's the next thing. And then at the very top of that, once all of our basic needs are met, we have food, water, shelter, safety, love, belonging, esteem, then it's self-actualization. We have reached a point in our life that our goal is to accomplish all that we can possibly accomplish. So I would challenge that a lot of you, and most of you, if you're in college, you're in a point in this in your life. You have met certain goals, you have certain things set up in your life that you think, okay, I want to see what's next for me. And what is next for me? Is it college? When I finish college, is it a profession? Is it that I want to have a certain position in that profession? Is it that I want to continue going to school and get a master's and doctorate level degrees? It's that part of our life where we want to be, to quote the old Army theme, a slogan is be all we can be. And that is self-actualization. So Maslow would say you have to know where your audience is in order to know what your message should be. I can tell you this as a young high school teacher, I did not have a clear understanding of the lives of some of my students. I taught at the high school where I grew up, but when you're classmates with students, you don't always know what their life is like outside of school. And so as a young teacher, I remember getting frustrated with students and thinking, why is this kid not doing their homework? They're smart. I know they know how to do their homework. I don't understand why they don't do their homework every day. They're getting zeros. And then in talking about this with the counselor at the school, she's like, well, let me tell you a little about this student. I mean, yes, he's a very bright student. He's involved in lots of things, but what you don't know about him is that he really doesn't have parents. He has a grandmother that does the best she can, but for the most part, he sleeps at whoever's friend's couch will allow him to sleep there that night. So typically, day to day, he's not really sure where he's going to sleep at night. Most of his meals are probably what he gets at school. And so he has a life outside of school that is very unstable. So as a young teacher, that made me understand that I thought my class was important. I thought my homework was important, but this student's most basic needs weren't being met. So how would I expect that student to prioritize my government homework I was giving him when he had to figure out where his food and shelter came from each night? I would say that many people experience kind of the importance of this maybe during COVID. Maybe we thought we were pretty healthy people. We thought mentally we were pretty strong individuals until we were put in a place of isolation. And then all of a sudden, our priorities were jumbled up because our mental health was not being met in a way that it had been previously. Our physical health was being challenged. Maybe many of you have had COVID and then had the long COVID. So all of a sudden, things that were working out and getting your homework done and all of these things that were super important to you took a back seat to your overall health and just having the energy to get up and function each day. So Maslow would say we have to consider where our audience is coming from to know what kind of information is going to be best for them to understand where we're coming from, to persuade them to do anything. So consider the needs of your audience. So contextual factors in public speaking. What kind of time do you have? So consider how much time I have for my speech, at what time of the day will my presentation occur, and that information helps you kind of know the context and the setting of your interaction. Why is the audience gathered? Is the audience there because they have to be? Is the audience there because they volunteered to be? What are the expectations for the audience? Why are you talking to them? How many audience members should be there, and what do they expect from you? What do they think they're gathering to hear? And what does the physical space look like? How many seats are there? How many audience members? What is the setup and arrangement of the environment? And that's going to give you a good idea of how to structure your message. If it's a close room, if the stage is down lower, if you have more closer proximity to your audience, you're not going to have to make as many extra efforts to build a connection with them. But if you're set apart pretty far from your audience, if it's a large room, if there's a lot of people, then there's a lot more information you may want to put in to make a connection to the audience, because it's going to be hard for you to do that just based on proximity. Hearing is the physical process by which sound waves hit the eardrums and send a message to the brain. And listening is an active process where one is specifically making an effort to understand, process, and retain information. So consider when you're giving a speech, consider the hearing/listening process that happens with your audience. You know, many of us hear things all day. We hear sounds, but we do not always make the active choice to attend to that sound, to process the sound, to figure out what the sound means. So there's different types of listening. There's comprehensive listening, which is the process of understanding and remembering the important information that's presented to you. There's empathetic listening, which is understanding feelings and motivation with the goal of helping. That's the relational type listening. This is the listening when your friend calls you and says, "Hey, I really need to talk," or a coworker is having a bad day and they come in and sit at your desk to really share what's going on with them. Then there's appreciative listening, which is artistic pieces. They benefit from knowing the patterns and concepts in art. And then there's critical listening, which is you're understanding and you're remembering the information, much like comprehensive, but in the process of that, you're evaluating it. You're not just taking in the arguments as fact. You're sort of debating the speaker in your head. You're determining if their arguments are quality, if they're valid, and you're looking at the evidence and the information that the audience the speaker is providing to you critically. So how can you help your audience listen? Deliberately repeat structural aspects of the speech. One thing that is very important to me when I listen to your speeches is that your main points are very clear, that I don't have to hunt and try to figure out what your main points were. In addition to that, I find it very helpful to repeat those things. For instance, if I'm giving a speech on a dog breed, I think I've used that as examples in this course at some point. So I'm talking about a dog breed. I'm going to talk about the Sheltie, which is the kind of dog that I have here. Matter of fact, asleep right at my feet. If I'm talking about the Sheltie and I talk about the origin of the breed, I talk about physical characteristics and personality characteristics. As I go through my speech, I'm going to make sure each main point is very clear to you. But not only that, I'm going to finish my main point of the origin of the Sheltie, and I'm going to go to my second main point. And I'll say something like, now that we have discussed the origin of the Sheltie, let us now move on and discuss the physical characteristics of the Sheltie. When I go to the third point, I might say, now, so far we've discussed the origin of the Sheltie, the physical characteristics of the Sheltie. Let's finally discuss the personality of the Sheltie. So make sure to reiterate what you have told your audience throughout throughout the presentation. It's not necessarily to be too repetitive and redundant, so that it kind of demeans your audience, but to throw out the important things over there repeatedly, your organizational structure, the main points that you hit, is an important way to ensure that the audience is following along with you. So plan redundancy uses a clear central idea statement. You preview your main points, you have connective transition words, and then an overall summary in the conclusion. So when we talk about the introductions, the body of your speech, and transitions, and the conclusion, this is exactly why we're doing that. That in our introduction of our speech, you're going to get the attention of your audience. Then you're going to clearly state your thesis statement, which is your central idea statement. You're going to clearly state your preview of your main points. And as you go through the body of your speech, you're going to clearly connect where we've been to where we're going. And then at the very end of the speech, you're going to do the same thing. Today, we talked about the dog breed, the Sheltie. We discussed this, this, and then briefly summarize. So there's a repetitiveness, a redundancy that's throughout your speech that lays out your organization so clearly that even the audience members that zone in and out, like we all do, still know exactly what you've talked about. So we know with listening that it's a challenge. I mean, some of us will say it's not our thing. I'm not a great listener. I try, but I'm really not a great listener. So what are barriers to listening? The first thing is neuroplasticity, and that has changed our ability and willingness to process long speeches. So think about this. How long are our attention span? How long is our attention span? And I would say it's becoming briefer and briefer. And think about how that's happened. Think about when you're on social media and think about TikTok videos and the length they have to be. And they're that long for a reason. They're that long because it is perfectly fits our attention span. During COVID, a lot of churches went online, and a friend's church in the Dallas area did kind of a study on how long the online sermons, how long did they keep church, how long did they have active people watching the online service. And in the study of going through months of COVID shutdown in the church and having a live feed, they realized that the average household watching only watched for 30 minutes. So then they did a 30-minute only church service because that was the length of time that families would sit and watch the church service. And I think, as sad as that is, I think that's very telling of the attention spans that we have to sit and focus and process a longer presentation. So one barrier to listening is just the length of it. We are so used to so many things being very fast, very busy in that short period of time, that our attention span, our ability, and our willingness to sit and listen to something long, lengthy is challenging. I'll say, in my job, we do a lot of training, and sometimes we do it on purpose. And sometimes we do it in person and sometimes we do it online. And I've learned I feel really bad for students because going and sitting in person and looking at someone for half a day through a session or a full day is very difficult. Just to focus and be willing to sit and be in the moment and actively listening for hours on end. Another barrier to listening is noisiness and constant electronic distractions, and they intrude on our lives. So think about all of the clutter going on in our mind, all of the distractions that we have with our electronics, that it's so easy to intrude and kind of take over and take away our focus. I mean, most of you probably have your cell phones with you all the time. If you're like me, you also have the watch. So even if your phone's up, you're getting alerts on your watch all the time. So you're trying to be focused, you're trying to be in the moment, but there's all of this other communication that's taking over throughout the entire session when you're supposed to be listening. We can process information faster than speakers can talk. So some of our challenge is that we basically get bored. We process the information much faster than they're speaking. So there's a lull. And then when we have a lull in our processing, we easily get distracted. And like I always say, I'm chasing squirrels, chasing rabbits in my mind. And I was perfectly in the moment. I was perfectly focused. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking about 10,000 other things. Sometimes stimuli around us. So sometimes if you're, and I can be very much this way. I think about sometimes at church, I'm really trying to focus and be attentive, but there's activity going on. There's young children nearby, and I get easily distracted by the people around me. Sometimes a smell can be distracting. Sometimes you hear people talking, and that's distracting. Other people have their laptop and they're typing. So sometimes the stimuli around us can interfere with our ability to listen. We don't often prepare ourselves well enough to listen. We don't often go into a situation where we should be attentive and listening. That could be class, that could be a speaking engagement, that could be church, that could be Bible study. We don't often go in preparing ourselves to focus and listen well enough. We think that sitting up, having our eyes open, looking in the right direction is the same as listening, and it's not. We have prejudice and preconceptions that lead to confirmation bias. We only want to listen to that which we agree with. And I know I'm very guilty of this. I think that's why I do like TikTok, is because if something comes up I don't agree with, I just hold it, not interested, and don't pay attention. And I think we do this in our everyday lives. I know that if we hear things that we don't agree with, then we just shut down and we only listen to things that we want to. Sometimes we don't like someone, and so we don't necessarily want to hear what they have to say. So, ways to improve listening: choose to believe that good listening matters and put that as a priority. Put that as a focus into something that you want to work on. Be aware of your preconceptions and keep an open mind. I'm going to tell you, if you don't agree with somebody about something, the best way to defend that is to be fully informed on every side of the issue. So if something's being presented to you that you don't agree with, the best thing you can do is keep an open mind, listen very carefully, and then sometimes it might change your opinion, but if it doesn't, it makes you feel the way you feel and you are fully informed about it. We're not sure of our beliefs until we've listened very carefully to both sides. We know what both sides feel, and we are convinced that we are in the right with our beliefs. So keep an open mind, be aware of our preconceptions, and listen intently to what you're hearing. And that's going to make you a better debater. It's going to make you a better person. If someone asks your feelings about something, then you're communicating it in a way that you're not an ignorant person. You're someone that's very well informed on every side of the issue. You didn't close your ears to all opposing viewpoints. You took them in and you came up with a very educated, very intelligent argument for why you feel the way you feel. Take notes intentionally and intelligently, saving questions for later. You have to figure out the best way to take notes for you. For me, I write terribly. My handwriting is horrible. So I found that the very best way for me to take notes is to type them as I go. So I always take a laptop with me or an iPad and I type as I go. That works best for me. For others, handwriting notes is what works, and they need to type, and they type them later to have it further instill in your brain. But you really do have to figure out the very best way that works for you. But it's very important that you're active in some way or another, that you're not just looking and going through the motions of being a listener, that you're actively taking notes to intentionally remember the things that you've heard. So a little bit more to consider. Can you think of some ways that knowing the psychographic characteristics of your audience can influence your speech preparation? So consider their values, their needs, their beliefs, or the attitudes of the classmates you should consider. So think about like encouraging a study abroad trip, asking them to consider buying a Mac instead of a PC, persuading them to sponsor a child in a poor country, volunteering for Special Olympics, Create a demographic characteristic list to analyze your audience by printing out a chart. And after completing the chart, discuss the types of topics and approaches to those topics you might consider based on information. So if you look in your textbook, there are some options and some more information that tells you about different ways to analyze your audience. In your textbook on page 44, you'll see the chart that it's referring to. So that's just a way to get some information about your audiences when you're giving presentations so that you have a better idea of where they're coming from. But again, the most basic way to do that in our course is to consider that you're giving this speech and the audiences are students. They are other students in the same way that you're a student. So what commonalities do you have? Thank you for your time today on chapter 2. That is all.